This program is made possible by the loyal financial support of the friends and partners of Family Policy Institute.
You are the salt of the earth. You are the light of the world.
Good evening and welcome to Salt and Light. Thank you for joining us. Tonight we're going to deal with the social cost of pornography. Since 1994, pornography was legalized in South Africa and has spread right across our country. Easy access and availability to even hardcore pornography has had devastating consequences on women, children and men. Tonight we're going to address the issue with some speakers. Dr. Nanci Coppola, Don Hilton, Pat Truman and Brian Willoughby. I'm speaking to Nanci Coppola here at the World Congress of Families in Salt Lake City, Utah, and she's the CEO of Program Reach, a program that deals with young people. So Nanci, tell us what you do, because when I was speaking to you at lunch this afternoon, you spoke about the work you do, and it piqued my interest because teenage pregnancies in South Africa is out of control, and that's primarily the kind of work you do, is to try to reduce that.
Yes. Well, teenage pregnancy is out of control pretty much everywhere globally. South Africa is not unique in this regard. We do see that teen pregnancy rates are starting to come down, but certainly not enough. The work that we do is we have youth development and character development programs. We work primarily with children between the ages of 9 to 19. We have 6 levels of curricula that are age appropriate, intended to help children build self-esteem and self-efficacy. So our youngest children go through what we call a character development program, and our older children, we have a youth development model. The program is intended to be taught in lieu of the regular health education program, and it is a evidence-based program that has been studied and evaluated for its impact on youth. We run programs, as I said, from 9 to 19, 6 different levels intended to meet children where they are at. What are their needs in terms of building self-esteem so that they can say, I'm worthy of making a healthier choice. And then as they get older, our work is to really educate them about all of the risks involved, not only in sexual activity, but alcohol, tobacco, drugs, and violence, because we know all of these behaviors cluster together, right? Children who engage in alcohol use or drug use are much more likely to become sexually active at a younger age. And we know from a physiological perspective and an emotional perspective, this is not healthy. Especially for young girls, they're much more prone to contract a sexually transmitted infection when they are under the age of 21 than when they're older, just because of the physiology of their bodies. We also know about the emotional consequences. Teens who engage in sex are much more likely to be depressed and much more likely to attempt suicide than their counterparts who are not sexually active.
In the research you do and the work you do with young people, what do you think is the primary reason young women become pregnant?
So the main reason that young girls are becoming pregnant, and people talk about contraceptive failure, and that's why people got pregnant. You don't get pregnant because of contraceptive failure, but you get pregnant because you've engaged in sexual activity. I often laugh when people say, oh, it was an accident, she got pregnant. No, actually, everything worked perfectly. That's what the intention is. You know, when things work, one will become pregnant if they engage in sexual activity. I think the biggest issue, the biggest reason that teens are engaging in sexual activity is because they are being led down this myth, down this lie of a path that tells them that everyone is doing it. And we know the research does not bear that out. When we look at statistics globally from the CDC and from youth risk behavior surveys across the world, we know that most teens are not engaging in sexual activity. In fact, here in the US, where if you ask teenagers, they would say 80% of their peers are having sex, only 47% of high school graduates are sexually active in this country.
Now, who's feeding them that lie?
Primarily that lie has been fed to them by their health teachers and the health programs that are run as these condom-based or so-called comprehensive sex ed programs. There was a research study that was commissioned not too long ago by Barna Research here in the U.S., and what they found was that among the teens that were surveyed, 4 in 10 teens said that their comprehensive sex ed teacher is more likely to pressure them to be sexually active than their boyfriend or girlfriend. Because what's happening is they are normalizing teen sexual activity, right? When we teach children that this is a normal behavior, they feel compelled to do it because every child wants to be normal. So if the perception is that this is normal, actually in teaching programs the way that they do, they're encouraging behavior. Instead, programs should focus on giving the skills to teens that they need to be able to say no to these risk behaviors and yes to brighter futures.
Is the media playing any role in sexualizing children at younger ages?
Absolutely, and one of the units in all of our programs with every age level of youth from 9 through 19 is a unit on the media and being good consumers of the media, because the media spreads that myth. Right, everyone, in the media is sexually active. You know someone for one episode, and so in life, what does that turn out to be? A few days, and you can engage in sexual activity with them. The media really promotes that hookup culture and that sense that that's an okay behavior, and we know that on so many levels, physiologically, emotionally, it's not.
What are the real consequences of teenagers getting pregnant in this country, United States of America, and through your research, other parts of the world?
I think the biggest problem, we'll address teen pregnancy first because you asked about that, but we also have to keep in mind that pregnancy is not the worst consequence of sexual activity. But the problem with teen pregnancy is that we put children in a position where they have to make decisions that they're not equipped to make, whether that is to become a parent or to abort the child. They're put in a position to make these decisions that are not decisions that their brains are formulated to make. Teenage brain is not developed yet. They don't understand the consequences of today's actions on the future, and that's not their fault. Their brain just doesn't have that capacity yet, and we don't develop that until we're in our mid-20s. And so to expect children to engage in adult behaviors and have to make adult decisions based on the consequences of those behavior is unfair, which is why then we see so much depression and all of the concomitant negative impacts of those behaviors. But we have to also think about the fact that sexual activity which causes teen pregnancy does not just cause teen pregnancy. The sexually transmitted infection rates are astronomical. We know here in the U.S. about 19 million teenagers are infected with a sexually transmitted infection each year. Syphilis, chlamydia, gonorrhea, all of these also have long-term impacts. Pelvic inflammatory disease is one of the number one reasons for infertility. So teens who engage in sex are jeopardizing their fertility later in life, and very often these are silent diseases. There are no symptoms. They don't know they have a disease, and it's only later in life when they want to conceive and can't that they find out about those negative impacts.
Is this the kind of information that you're sharing with me now? Is this readily available in the media?
I think that the media doesn't talk about this at all, and the question is, why are they not talking about it? Why are we hiding the truth from teens? And in that Barna study that I referred to earlier, 1 in 5 teens actually said that in their health programs, condom demonstrations actually lead them to believe that sex is expected. And so if we have most of the programs that are taught across the globe, our programs are sexually explicit programs, comprehensive programs, not programs that are focused on avoiding the risk, but simply reducing the risk. And when we tell kids that reducing the risk is enough, we put them in jeopardy because we're not telling them the truth about how little condoms do protect them against many of the sexually transmitted infections and diseases. And certainly the condom offers no protection against the emotional consequences associated with sex.
So what do you think is the answer? What is the solution to reversing this trend of rising teenage pregnancies?
I think that parents need to really fight to have programs that are teaching their children not only the values that parents want taught, but also we need to approach this from a public health perspective. The best public health message is always a message of prevention. We do not teach children that it's best to smoke filtered cigarettes rather than to smoke. We do not teach children that cocaine use is superior to heroin use because it's less risky. So why are we teaching children when it comes to sexual activity, why do we not use a primary prevention model, which we know is the best health initiative for any disease state, right? And so if we are going to talk about preventing sexually transmitted infections and all of the emotional diseases in children, a primary prevention model says we avoid the risks of sexual activity by abstaining from those behaviors, not reducing the risk by putting on a condom.
That is wisdom, and just the information you're sharing with me could change people's lives. And you'd expect the media to get this kind of information because so many young women are destroying their futures, getting pregnant at younger ages. But Nanci, we want to thank you for the great work you're doing, and thank you for speaking to us.
Well, thank you so much for the opportunity to speak to you, and I wish you the best of luck. And we need to just remember that our youth are precious, and they deserve the best possible message that we can get them, and we owe that to them beyond any doubt.
I agree.
2005, I had the opportunity to meet at an international conference a young man who had struggled with both a cocaine addiction and a pornography addiction. And he described how overcoming his cocaine addiction was difficult but possible because he could change his setting and change the people he hung out with. And with determination, he was able to successfully overcome that addiction. And at the time I met him, he had spent 3 years being drug-free. However, he said to me, overcoming my porn addiction is proving to be far more difficult. In his own words, he said, "Porn is everywhere I go. There is no escaping it. It's on TV, it's on billboards, and it's even on the side of the bus that I ride." This young man explained to me that he had lost his wife, lost his children, lost his job, and still could not find the strength to overcome that addiction.
People ask me all the time, what are you talking about when you're talking about pornography? I was in another presentation where our executive director was speaking about this topic this week at the Congress, and when it got over, someone said, what do you mean by pornography? And there was a lot of heads going up and down. This is not a legal definition. This is my own definition. Nudity or sex acts erotically depicted, intended to excite. So when I use the word pornography, that's what I'm talking about. You get people saying, well, this is pornography or that's pornography. I'm talking about nudity or sex acts erotically depicted, intended to excite. And what I know for certain after 30 years in working on the issue of pornography is that the more hardcore pornography you have in society, actually, you could say the more pornography you have in society, the more you'll have promiscuity, addiction, prostitution, trafficking, child pornography, sex abuse. This is what we call the porn triangle. If you reduce this base, which is hardcore pornography, everything else is reduced right on up the line. And when I was first with the Department of Justice, one of the things I did, there were all these people from around the country writing us, urging us on to prosecute these big pornographers in the country, and I read a lot of those 100,000 letters that were sent to us. So many people wrote to us how they lost their son to pornography, how they lost their husband to pornography. Husbands wrote to us from jail saying that they had molested their own daughter, and it all started with Playboy magazine, and it's this continuation, this need for harder and more deviant material, the addiction that goes on. They demand more material, and as the porn triangle indicates, they move on up and act out. I won't go through all the harms that are included. We'll talk about some as I go along here. But I want to highlight this one. It increases the demand for child pornography. You don't hear that very often. When I left the Justice Department 20 years ago, child pornography was virtually wiped out in America. Then the internet started to be popularized right after that. Now, what happened in the internet? Did we suddenly empower pedophiles and they're all of a sudden looking for child pornography? Not at all. So much of the child pornography that you find that people are looking for online are looked for by men, women, and even children who begin by looking at adult pornography. But the brain, as Dr. Hilton points out, always wants something new, something harder, something more deviant. And if we were to draw a graph of what the child pornography problem in America looks like, 20 years ago it was this base, and now it's spiked up just like this. Adult pornography is responsible for much of it. We like to use this spider web talking about the connection of sexually exploitive behaviors. Here's porn right here. Here's prostitution. What do you think the percentage of men who visit a prostituted women, what do you think the percentage is of them looking at pornography? Would you need a study to say it's 100%? But those who don't look at pornography, who make sure that they don't let that into their brain, what percentage of them do you think are walking off to prostitutes? Very little. It's the same with sex trafficking. There's no such thing as prostitution without sex trafficking. Don't think of that as two different things. Every strip club in America has prostitution, and every strip club in America, one way or another, you'll find has sexual trafficking. Child sex abuse, child porn, it's all interrelated. Dr. Hilton talked about the public health crisis of pornography, and we like to use this language because it isn't just this moral problem that a family down the street has. No, it's far beyond that. Everybody in this family, in this room, has someone in their family, or maybe yourself or someone. It's all such a great problem today that it's now a public health crisis. There's a couple studies that indicate that first exposure to pornography is about 11, 12 years of age. Oftentimes it's much worse than that. We had a woman call us here 2 years ago in the summer to say, my 6-year-old daughter looks for pornography or sexual images every place she is, every chance she gets. She was shown pornography in daycare by someone. What kind of a country have we built where 6-year-olds are demanding to see pornography? Kids are getting a daily dose of pornography. These are some of the statistics that are out there. By the time these kids are adults, virtually all of them have seen pornography. Now, I hope that many of them don't. They just look at it once and move away, but that in fact isn't what we know about kids. That is such a stimulus to the brain, and it creates such a desire. They want to move on beyond that and look again and again and again. And it is now so very available that they'll do that. Where do kids get pornography? This is so important to understand. National Center for Missing and Exploited Children says 79% of the kids get it at home. Now, think about that. I asked the president of a major filtering company here in Utah a couple of years ago, what percentages of the homes in America are properly protected from pornography, from getting pornography by filtering it, etc. And he said about 5%. About 5%. And you can do this little test I'm going to give you. It's a one-question test. How many internet-connected devices, Mom and Dad, do you have in your home? And if you return husband and wife to each other and ask that question, you'd get a different answer. You probably couldn't add them up, but you think your home is protected. And then what about that laptop that your husband no longer uses? He wanted a faster, bigger laptop. The old one's in the basement, the one that gets internet. And the kids know that, and they're getting internet pornography there. What about mom's cell phone? Oh, I keep it with me all the time. Yeah, but you take a nap once in a while. You go to the store and you forget it once in a while, and those kids know how to get pornography on that phone. 79% right in the home. What do kids do when they look at pornography? They want to copy it. They want to do what they're seeing in pornography. And the worst thing is kids today are becoming pornographers. What is sexting? That's when you're taking pictures of yourself or your friends, or trading pictures of your classmates, or getting pictures off the internet and sending it to others. But this is what it is for high school kids, and it's a popular pastime for high school kids. It's children producing and distributing child pornography. This is a problem in schools around the country. This is a problem legislatures all around the country are dealing with. Children are taking pictures. They might be 17 years old or 15 years old, taking pictures of their classmates same age. That is child pornography. First offense on the federal level will get you a minimum of 5 years in jail. What do you do about Johnny, who's 15 years old, and he has a collection of a third of the girls in his class? and this happens. And why do kids do it? This is a survey here, these questions it was a multiple issue survey in one girls magazine asking kids why they get involved, asking the girls, why do you get involved in sexting? Do you do it to get attention? 80% said yes. What's wrong with the kids that growing up today that 80% of them think that the giving of their most personal self will get them attention? 2/3 hope to be cool. 56% or 9% want to be like the popular girls. 54% want to find a boyfriend. There's apps and whatnot that they're using today. Pornography equals violence. Dr. Anna Burgess and her team studied the most popular 50 porn films in America a couple years ago, and they found that 88.2% of the images of the scenes, 88% of the scenes contained images of violence. And it's violence against women. Now, why does the porn industry produce so much violence and sex in their movies? Well, they'll tell you it's not them. They don't do it because they think this is a good idea. This is what people are demanding. I mean, when a man goes on the computer or a woman goes on the computer and looks at topless women or whatever for a while, they want something different right away. And they keep escalating to the point where our culture is demanding sex and violence. So that in the most popular films, that's what they're given. 88% of the scenes depicts violence against women. Now, let me ask you this, with such a high percentage of young people engaging in or consuming pornography, and the studies show the college students, it's almost everyone. It's better than 80, it's like 82 or 84%. What kind of a nation, what kind of a future do you have when you have such high numbers of young men enjoying sex mixed with violence against women? We don't know the answer. We have no roadmap to their future, but what we know is that they will be running our country in just a few short years. Dr. Sharon Cooper, who is a pediatrician and a medical professor, says that porn normalizes sexual harm. This is true for adults, and the studies all show how your mind changes in terms of what you believe, but it's especially true for children. I don't mean to take the role of a neurosurgeon here, but prefrontal cortex is the part of the brain that is apparently, according to Dr. Cooper, so impacted, and she says that prefrontal cortex has to develop well, and it doesn't develop fully until they're in their early 20s, I understand. But that's the home of good judgment, common sense, impulse control, and emotion. Here's something that our society hardly even considers, the fact this issue of children as sexual offenders. There's a British study showing that at least in 1 year, they've discovered 4,500 children who are sexual offenders, some as young as 5 years of age. Now, that's a country of 62 million. We're a country of 300 million. Do you think things are different there than here? This is a greatly underreported crime. Are you going to report your 12-year-old boy for molesting your 7-year-old daughter? No, but it is a crime in our society. Of the ones that they've studied, they could find 4,500. We hear about this all the time, and parents write us, law enforcement officers talk to us about it. What is happening to our young people? What is the effect on boys? Boys gain from pornography a sense of sexual entitlement. Sexual entitlement. They're looking at all these images. They see the girls smiling in pornography. They must enjoy it. This is how they learn to interact with the girls. And the peer pressure on girls to look at pornography is very great. Much of that comes from the boys and what they require, because they have a sense of sexual entitlement. We used to always say when I was at the Justice Department that females are not interested in pornography. The interest of women or girls in pornography is has a 20-year history. 20 years ago, they weren't interested. Women are just built differently than men. They're not, as you know this. But boys are demanding sex, and the peer pressure is very great, and girls are getting involved in it. Dr. Marianne Layden, who's also on our board of directors, says that what pornography does is develop permission-giving beliefs in the consumers. They think they have permission to do what they saw on that screen.
You ever had something happen in your life and all of a sudden everything's different, but you didn't know it at the time? Or society has that happen too. You know, things are going along just fine and all of a sudden an event happens. And we really don't get it when it happens. We think that life is going to be the same, but actually everything after that event is different. You remember the Spindletop Gusher in 1900 in Beaumont, Texas. Everyone thought, well, that's black stuff. What's that all about? It's oil. But then Henry Ford shortly thereafter built a Model T and an assembly line, and the world changed, right? Little events back then, I don't think they really got how big it would change the world. And of course, then you have the telephones coming around. You have Thomas Edison inventing this thing called a light bulb, you know, where things turn on, no more candles and gas and all. And then this flight, just a short little flight just above the ground. And that's why we're here today. We've all caught flights and have flights to go home. The whole world changes with just pivotal moments. Man on the moon. In a garage, Bill Gates and some other guys invented this nerdy thing called a computer with Microsoft, and they got it working. What's all that about? And of course, then these computers started talking to each other. And in 1992, the internet came around. And it was actually in September of 1990, September 10th, that a group of journalists networked and said, wow, let's do a search engine for papers so we don't have to go through all these journals anymore. So they had the idea of doing a search site. This is the first Google that started. And of course, look where we are today with iPhones, with literally everything we need to know, whoever we need to talk to, carrying around in our pocket all the time. Fabulous technology that we can use. Unfortunately, also it's pocket porn for 14-year-olds, for 12-year-olds. Now, we didn't really realize then, in 1992, how the world was changing. It was just like the Spindletop Gusher, but we didn't know it yet. We had already culturally gone down the minute that happened in one way, and we didn't even get it. The anonymity, affordability, and accessibility, the unlimited novelty, the video versus still photos. You know, Marilyn Monroe's centerfold in 1953 in the first edition of Playboy by Hugh Hefner. Long shot from anything that 12-year-old Johnny can pull up on his iPhone today. It's a supernormal stimulus. I'll talk about that briefly. And it is biologically addictive. And when you see press releases saying porn is not addictive, don't believe them. I'll touch briefly on why they say that today. So, and this is Huffington Post. They're not really trying to be anti-porn here. They're just stating, almost bragging, that, hey, porn sites get more visitors each month than Netflix, Amazon, and Twitter combined. YouTube, look at this YouPorn. That's just one of the many sites, Porn-Wiki, Pornhub, owned by a company called MindGeeks. Who's heard of MindGeeks? Handful, Vonna, no cheating. You got, so a few of us. MindGeeks is the largest porn monopoly in the world, okay? Owns virtually every porn site on the internet. Where's the FTC on this? Well, anyone else would be called a monopoly, but because it's porn, they look the other way. 70% of men, 30% of women. Jennifer Johnson, this is by her permission. I'm using this slide. She's a friend. I've done several conferences with her. She's the chairman of sociology at Virginia Commonwealth University in Richmond, Virginia. Used to work for the Defense Department looking at internet nodes. And now Jennifer works and looks at pornography nodes. And she looks at different websites. There's like 24, 25 million porn websites, and so it's endless novelty. This is what it looks like to a consumer. All these nodes which contain multiple sites that link into the node. So it looks like millions of owners of porn sites are making millions of dollars. We'll come back to that slide at the end, but it is endless novelty. In fact, this researcher out of Montreal said, we started our research seeking men in their 20s who had never consumed pornography. We couldn't find any. Sadly, this is a true statement. So a few years ago, Clark Watson, he's a neurosurgeon who's also a professor of law at UT Law School, wrote an editorial for Surgical Neurology International, a peer-reviewed journal in my field of neurosurgery. In it, based on brain science and DNA structure and function in addiction, we predicted that porn would show, as drug addiction shows, both structural abnormalities and metabolic abnormalities in our paper. And immediately some, I would call them almost pro-porn academics, at least softer on porn academics, attacked our findings and said, impossible. You'll never see any of these. We also, and I'll come back to that in a minute, but also in our paper we called for a public health approach to pornography. We used cholera as an example to do a public health look at pornography. In other words, whether or not we have a religious view of pornography, fine. Why? We don't bring that into the public health sphere. In the public health sphere we talk about science, not religion or morals. So let's look at this little sign. This basically starts with Anthony Schutte. This is the first tobacco advertisement in the world. We're going to look at the tobacco industry and the porn industry, because the porn industry is taking lessons from the tobacco industry today. He wrote this little tract published back in Europe. They found this, of course, indigenous plant, this leaf tobacco, in the Americas, and brought the plant back to Europe. It hath many strange virtues which are yet unknown. No kidding. Okay? And of course then, by 1619, when Jamestown's getting underway, they don't even have, it's becoming in such demand already in Europe that they need more workers. So a Dutch ship stops by with some African slaves. Hey, we'll take them. And slavery is fueled for that first century by tobacco. So exploitation of the people smoking it, they didn't even know they were killing them yet, and they're exploiting the slave workers to make it. And again, porn has taken a lesson from that book as well. And of course, this is the 50s. Doctors smoke more cigarettes than any other, more Camels than any other cigarette. Real advertisements. My profession, from the 50s. How about this guy, a throat surgeon? Give your throat a vacation. How about a permanent one? And you remember the Joe Camel, right? Notice, that's a teenage camel. So they were saying, are you guys advertising to kids? Oh, us tobacco? No, we wouldn't do that. Okay, we'll talk about that in a minute. We'll come back to it. So what we have now is the Clarence Little phenomenon in the porn industry. What do I mean by that? Briefly, Clarence Little, PhD researcher, Harvard-educated, president of the University of Michigan, and basically a pro-tobacco scientist who said tobacco not only is not addictive, but it causes no harm. It's good for your lungs. No cancer. And he was president of the tobacco research industry, a group of doctors who supported tobacco all through the 50s, 60s, 70s, and even into the 70s. Clarence Little, cover of Time magazine, smoking his pipe, said tobacco is harmless. Okay, a doctor. Believe me, trust me, I'm a doctor. Many times you heard that one. Okay? And here's this cozy relationship between Clarence Little, the academic, the professor, and industry, right? The Tobacco Seven, remember them in front of Henry Waxman's committee? Smoking is not addictive. And they're experts, PhDs, backing them up in 1994. And there's people that still say this. So what they did is they knew this, and this is in 1968. This is internal memos inside the tobacco industry. They knew tobacco was, they had internal memos, yeah, it's causing cancer. What, they didn't say, oh, let's quit selling it, let's quit killing people. They said, gosh, how do we hide this? We have to keep making our billions. We have to keep killing 500,000 Americans a year and 6 million people worldwide. So how do we hide it? We create controversy. So they said we've got to cast doubt on the cause and effect theory of disease and smoking. Controversy, unknowns. And that was in 68, 3 years after everyone else agreed it causes cancer and put the warning labels on the cigarettes. So then targeting teens, okay? They said we're not targeting teens. Internal memos from the 70s that said, yep, most people start smoking. This is the tobacco industry, internal memos. The 14 to 24 market, and they'll smoke for 25 years. Most of them start before the age of 18. We need to capture them now. They were saying it. They wanted the kids. Porn industry's doing the same thing. Nicole Prouse, for instance, we'll come back to her, was at UCLA, is not anymore, has started a private company dealing with more sexual excitement kind of things. It's a private company dealing with brain stimulation and sexuality. But this is basically from her paper, and this paper received wide press in the popular press. Hey, when a paper comes out and says porn's good for you and it's not addictive, it's party time, right? The press loves those papers. She said one possibility, she and her co-authors, is that those with higher sexual sensation seeking, in other words, they're born that way. They're not addicted. Addiction doesn't change you. You're just born that way. Use pornography at younger ages and broaden the content of their pornography when sexual partners are not available to them to engage in actual sexual risk behaviors. We need younger and younger people watching porn. Then they can just watch it and they won't have to do it. Sounds really good, right? Advertisers need to quit showing cars on TV. People will just watch the pretty cars. I mean, it's remarkable. So the Daily Beast, very pro-pornography. They love these porn studies that Nicole Prouse did. They did an EEG study where they said, wow, based on our EEG studies, it looks like it's not addiction. So they immediately, this is the study, Steele, Staley, Fong, and Prouse published this study in the journal Neuroscience and Psychology. And of course, a Daily Beast and many popular press outlets echoed this in the popular press. So I published this piece in the originating journal as a peer-reviewed rebuttal, showing the problems with this. And then we published later in Sexual Addiction and Compulsivity, these are both peer-reviewed journals, Bonnie Phillips, Rod Chajul, and myself published this other piece looking more extensively at the earlier paper, that Empire's paper, that Emperor's New Groove paper. Do you think these made the Daily Beast? No, not at all. And so it's this Clarence Little effect. Prouse and Lay and others are essentially Clarence Little. So just to illustrate that, this is Melissa Hill and Howard Levine, former pornography producer, performer, radio talk show, a pornography-based radio talk show in Los Angeles. Nicole Prouse, this is a Twitter where she's congratulating her on this. Basically, we're buds, business AVM. This is really good. And this is a link to an interview of Nicole Prouse on her show where she's talking about it. She's also talking about her new company, Liberos, and promoting it. And this, of course, this show is promoting her. Look who's actually sponsoring the show, adultempire.com. Who are they? They're a porn website, porn company. Who are they a subsidiary of? MindGeek, the number one, I'll talk about it, the number one porn company in the world. They own virtually every site, or anyone broadcasting on the internet is going to have to work under MindGeek. So here is Nicole Prouse saying porn's not addictive, being promoted by Adult Empire, which is a MindGeek subsidiary. Again, the Clarence Little effect from tobacco. Then this one as well, this is a porn, Nicole Prouse to a porn producer. If you need problems, if you have problems with people attacking the pornography, let me know. Remember, she wrote this paper, Emperor's New Clothes. Melissa Hill, Jeannie's story I heard at AVN, Adult Video News. It's the big porn industry meeting every year. So Nicole Prouse was at the AVN meeting, at the meeting with the big pornography industry meeting every year. Again, this Clarence Little cozy effect between porn academics and the industry. And then here, this is a porn producer saying, Nicole Prouse, I love it. You're our superhero, Nicole. Needless to say, those of us that write rebuttals to her journals are not her superheroes. Another, this was a paper that actually in a newspaper article, and when we talked, remember, about structural changes, we predicted we'll see structural changes in pornography. Some more academics that are a little softer on porn said, we have the best MRI scanners in the world at UCLA. I can promise you, if we scan a pornography user's brain, we won't see any structural differences. This is 2010. And of course, I'm going to talk about this later, 2014. Simon, Kuhn, and Gallinger out of the Max Planck Institute in Germany just last year, published in the journal JAMA Psychiatry, Journal of the American Medical Association Psychiatry, found structural changes in the human brain with pornography. We'll talk about that more in a minute. MindGeek, I talked about them earlier. It's basically the monopoly, the porn monopoly of the world. And like the site that is promoting Nicole Prouse, they're all under MindGeek. So these porn professionals are being promoted by MindGeek. Remember this? How billions of options? That's not what it looks like from the owner's side. From MindGeek's side, this is what Jennifer Johnson found. That's MindGeek. These are the billions of people on the outside looking in. So basically, those individual users think they're getting that arrayed field of millions of sites, but it's actually all consolidated under increasingly tight links with mind geeks controlling the center. Very interesting. Goes back to R.J. Reynolds and Morris with tobacco, doesn't it? Those tobacco companies. So addiction represents a pathological but powerful form of learning and memory. When I say learning and memory, I mean how does it change your brain? We know that it does. Now, I became interested in the brain side. I developed a close friendship with this man, Derek Denton, a wonderful man. He's been on the Nobel Prize Committee. He's just a remarkable scientist in Australia, and he and I became friends. I had been invited to speak in Australia. While there, I had the idea of looking at, basically they study what makes our brains crave things that we need. And one of the most basic cravings is salt. So they have a sheep model, and they were looking at what makes these sheep, if you deplete them of salt, their brain absolutely craves it. So what happens in the brain to cause that brain itch to crave salt? And it basically, certain DNA transcripts are evoked and woken up, and they crank and go into gear, and we found out that those same DNA sequences are exactly the same as the DNA sequences that are turned on with cocaine. And that had never been shown. In our paper, we worked with Duke University on that paper, and I was honored to be a member of that team. It was published in the National Academy of Sciences, the PNAS, in 2011. National Geographic wrote an article about our paper and said basically drugs hijack instinctive need for salt. And I think that's a good description of addiction. It hijacks, it usurps what should be a motivation for us to survive, and instead takes over. What happens then are these are brain wires called axons and dendrites. And notice this is unaddicted, this is addicted. These new sprouts represent the brain saying, that felt really good. I don't want to forget that. So it grows a new road, a new brain wire, a new road to another cell so it doesn't forget. And we first saw this with cocaine. Then we saw it with salt craving. And then, yes, we saw it with pictures et al. With sex. Animal model looks neuroplasticity, brain change with a powerful reward like sex, just like cocaine. How does that happen? Powerful drugs like delta phos B, chemicals, are turned on by DNA in the brain, and they change the brain. And in people that are addicted, these are higher than in normal physiology, in normal life. That changes the brain structurally as well. And in fact, 20 years ago, we found that violin players, the earlier they start to play, the part of the brain that controls the string hand gets bigger. The more they play, the bigger it gets. The brain, as Zatori said, who did a violin study, the brain is the source of behavior, but in turn is modified by the behaviors it produces. Learning sculpts brain structure. And so this was the violin study. Ebert, Schwenkirst, a violin study. And Drakonski, they took medical students and scanned them before and after 3 months of studying. The brain got bigger. What happens with addiction? Every study, cocaine or even natural addictions like obesity and sexuality have shown shrinkage in the reward area and changes in the frontal lobes. And this study that I just alluded to earlier, Kuhn's study in JAMA Psychiatry, showed the same thing. So here's that Kuhn study. We're going back to it. Brain atrophy in the striatum, which is that nucleus accumbens area. It's the area of the brain where the accumbens is. And it's basically a reward center. Dopamine is a powerful brain reward, and it's very important in wanting. It decreases frontal connectivity. This thinking judgment part of the brain is impaired. And the more hours per week viewed, the more the changes in the brain, the more structural changes. And then we also predicted metabolic changes. Cambridge University last year published in PLOS ONE looking at metabolic studies. So we talked about structural. What's metabolic? You show a person with cocaine, a line of cocaine, and the reward center of their brain lights up like a Christmas tree. Normal person means nothing. So this is the brain of an unaddicted person, brain of cocaine. Well, cocaine looks like this. This is porn. It looks just like cocaine. This is the Kuhn study. And basically, she found that, and this is the second study she did on it, that these studies together provide support for an incentive motivation theory of addiction. So they're talking about addiction and brain change. Nicholas Tinbergen, he found that if you paint bird eggs, he received a Nobel Prize for describing this, that if you paint bird eggs, plaster eggs, and the bird the birds will normally try to nest the plaster eggs, and they will prefer plaster eggs in preference to their eggs if the plaster eggs are bigger and brighter. And he called that a supernormal stimulus. Then he took butterfly wings, and he found out that male butterflies, when they're confronted with plastic false female butterfly wings, they ignore real females and try to mount and mate the paper cardboard fake female butterfly wings. And that's called a supernormal stimulus. And pornography is that. I published this paper in the same journal that Nicole Prouse published her paper as well, talking about that. 3D optics, computer exoskeletons. These are bragging. These are businesses saying, we're not going to need women anymore. We're going to have haptic technology, and people can just have sex with computers. In fact, virtual reality porn will make 2D porn completely obsolete. So, in Japan, the pressing need to find a partner has been alleviated by the ubiquity of porn, sex toys, virtual sex on bedroom computers. So it's really having an effect. Naomi Wolf, the feminist, said the same thing. She said, she described a supernormal stimulus. For the first time in human history, the image's power and allure have supplanted that of real naked women. Today, real naked women are just bad porn. And yes, it is increasing rape. If you want to talk more about this data, they say porn makes rape go down. It doesn't. Corey Young's Iowa Law Review, if you want to get a picture of this title, or I'll give you the reference later, it doesn't. Lexington Steele. I find myself not unlike the slaves of 400 years ago. I trade my own flesh for monetary compensation and sell the flesh of others for the same. Steve Hirsch owns Vivid, $100 million a year making Vivid porn films. You want your daughter to be in Vivid, Steve? No, he said, I think I would send her to medical school instead. Just like William Webb, former CEO for Philip Morris Tobacco. You want your son to smoke? No, I don't want my sons to smoke. I don't think it's healthy for them. They want your daughters and they want your sons so they can fly in their private jets. Now they're 19, they're hookers, they don't care. This is Jim Powers, a pornographer. They're a throwaway commodity in a throwaway world. Alan Payton, it's exploitation. Such development has only one true name. It's exploitation, when we use other people instead of ourselves. So between the stimulus and response, there's a space, and that space is our power to choose our response. And our response lies our growth and our freedom. Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning. So, but in other words, we're a brain like Viktor Frankl. We have emotion. And I believe we are more than just the stimulus response. An amoeba eating a paramecium. It doesn't think, it just eats. It's a stimulus response. That is the porn view of sex. We're not humans anymore. We don't have a brain. Men are brutes, women are pieces of meat. I believe it's more about human emotion, about human love. I believe that we are better than that. I believe we can do better than that. Thank you.
I'm going to focus a little bit on our youth, specifically, talking particularly about teenagers and young adults. And then I also want to focus on the relational cost of pornography. And I'll kind of talk a little bit about what that is and share some data with you about several projects and data collection projects that I'm involved with to give you some actual numbers about what some of those costs might be. Now, real quick, let's talk a little bit about why we might want to focus on our youth. Obviously, pornography consumption is rapidly increasing across all segments of our society because of the internet, because of the changes that Don was talking about. But particularly in our youth population, this is one of the populations we're talking about, adolescents and young adults, who are seeing a lot of increased use of pornography. This is the generation now that has been raised since birth with their iPhones and tablets and internet connectivity. They've never known anything different. And so this is the group that has kind of grown up with pornography all around them. Now, youth in particular is a concern for several specific reasons. One is early exposure. We know, regardless of what kind of sexuality we're talking about, whether it's actual sexual behavior or pornography, early exposure has risks both in young adulthood and childhood and later in life. Again, that's regardless of if it's pornography, earlier sexual initiation, early masturbation. Tons of research, social science research out there suggesting that's going to have harmful effects later in life. Pornography is no different. The other issue is this escalating usage. Again, I'll show you some numbers that suggest that particularly in our youth populations, pornography use is skyrocketing. It's become, what I'm going to talk about is normalized, which means it's just what everyone does in this particular population. Now, from a psychological and relationship perspective, the added concern here has to do with when we think about the human life course, when we think about development, when we think about children, and we think about all of us. We talk about our youth as a foundational part of life. Regardless of whatever part of life we're talking about, we know that part of what makes you you is your childhood experiences. For most of us, that's the experiences we had in our families. We get experiences as children with our families, with our peers. That's the foundation of who we are. As we grow up, we get into young adulthood, and we often talk about in young adulthood about experimenting. Now, we don't use experimenting as a dirty word. There can be unhealthy experimentation with sex and drugs, but you can also have healthy experimentation with public speaking, with advocacy groups, with volunteering. That can be a form of putting myself out there and experimenting with different causes. That's what we do in young adulthood to build off of that foundation. And as we build off of that, we eventually start to develop who will we become as an adult? What are going to be our behavioral patterns? What kind of relationships am I going to have in my family as an adult? It builds off of those childhood and young adult experiences. So the question then becomes, as pornography becomes more and more prevalent among our youth, starts to become a part of both the childhood experiences and the young adult experimentation, what is that going to have implications for as adults? What is that going to change about our adulthood patterns? How is pornography affecting that particular process? Again, back to the foundational idea. All of us started to learn about relationships in our family. We looked at our parents, we looked at our peers. I'm doing a study right now. We're finding one of the biggest influences on young adults is their friends' parents. And they listen to their friends talk about their parents, and that affected how they thought about relationships. So we get these experiences in our family that form the foundation of everything we're going to do relationally in our life. How does pornography affect this process? How does pornography then potentially impact how our youth are thinking about marriage? Something that was mentioned before. Do we actually see evidence that pornography users in youth are not just struggling with the brain chemistry changes, issues with addiction, etc., issues with changing scripts? Are they actually changing how they think about long-term marriages and commitment? Let's look at that. First off, and this is from another study that I did of young adults, 20 to 25, who are unmarried, and we looked at their sexual behaviors, and we looked at how they thought about marriage, and again, we looked at, did we see differences between these young adults who are using pornography and those that were not, those that were still abstaining in some way from pornography. And one of the questions we asked them is, do you even want to be married now? 20 to 25, a little bit earlier than the national average. That national average of marriage is about 27, 28. But do you want to get married now? Again, separating by gender, because we still see those big gender differences, and then looking at the porn users and the non-porn users. For the men, you can see that as we look at the non-porn users to the porn users, there is a significant jump in that blue line, which is the ones that disagree. I don't want to get married now. Among the porn users, that's a significantly higher percent that are saying, no, I don't want to get married now. Among the women, we see the same jump. Not quite as drastic as the men, but the percentage still increases among the pornography users for female. Significantly more of these men and women that are using pornography are actually saying, I don't want to be married now. So now you have some data for that. This is actually the smallest effect that we saw in our study, was this particular question. When we asked them about this question, when do you expect to get married? So we asked them, okay, so you're not married, you're in your early 20s. When do you expect to get married? Here is your non-porn men and women. About 25 is what they said. That's about when they expect to get married. A couple years later, when we looked at the porn users, it skyrocketed. The men jumped almost 3 years in their expected age of marriage. The women, again, not quite as much. They jumped about 1.5 years. A significant change in where they were putting marriage in their life. Then we asked them, do you agree that there's more advantages to being single than being married? Do you think it's better to be a single person than a married person? Again, the non-porn users didn't really agree with that very much. When we looked at our porn users, skyrocketed. Again, for men and for women. The men, porn users, almost 50% of them then were agreeing that it's more advantageous to be single than to be married. Across everything we saw, we started to see significant shifts in how these youth were thinking about marriage based on their pornography history. So what does this mean? It means that we're seeing evidence now that among our youth, pornography use is significantly tied to a desire to delay marriage and a devaluing of marriage generally. What does that mean? Well, it means a lot, both short-term and long-term again. I've done several studies that have shown that when youth start to delay marriage, when they start to think negatively about marriage, it starts to affect them adversely in young adulthood. They have elevated risk-taking. They start binge drinking more. They start to use drugs more. They think, I don't have to settle down for several years. I can live it up now as a youth. It starts to change their sexual patterns. Hooking up goes up. Casual sexual activity goes up when these youth start to devalue marriage. There's long-term effects for this too. In a study that I did in 2012, I showed that I could actually predict when people got married in their 20s based on what they told me about marriage when they were 18 in high school. As we see in these graphs, as pornography users start to want to delay marriage and devalue marriage, it potentially is going to change their long-term trajectories towards those relationships. Now, one caution I do want to make about this research. It's hard to predict what people are going to do 10, 20, 30 years down the road. Marital beliefs are extremely complex and multifaceted, and porn is probably just one small piece of what puts people on probable trajectories either towards or away from marriage. However, as we think about the social costs of pornography, and as we think about the relational costs of pornography, there is growing evidence that suggests that one of the potentially most devastating social costs of pornography is what we're going to see not today, but in 20 years from now. Is this generation that's grown up using and accepting of pornography has now fundamentally changed how they think about relationships and families, fundamentally changed how they think about marriage. And again, we don't know what the long-term effect of that's going to be, but there's evidence that that could drastically change what families and marriage look like in this country. Thank you.